Folks, we are live. Welcome to the Tavern Chat Cast. With me, as usual, is Bad Mike from North Texas RPG Con.
Hello.
And joining us for the first time, Steve Winter, one of the classic TSR era creators, designers, editors. Steve, welcome.
Hey, glad to be here.
Yeah.
So,
yeah,
Mike, I'm going to toss the ball into your hands.
Steve was a. You don't even. Okay, I'm about to say I didn't even. I don't know if Steve probably doesn't know this at all, but you honestly, you were our dream get for this. It was you or Jeff Grubb. Okay, so you were competing with Jeff,
and I would have fanboyed over
like,
Jeff.
Man, if we could get either of those two guys on, yeah.
Yes.
Well,
he's
great.
a Marvel
That's something I can throw that in Jeff's face.
Yes, because Jeff's already seen me.
Yeah,
those
definitely.
One time I met him. Geez. It's funny because with me, with the folks from TSR, although I started gaming in like 81, it wasn't the first generation. It wasn't the Frank Metzers and the Tim Cass that I really got to focus on. It was more the second edition creators. It was Jeff. It was Steve. It was anybody who was putting out things like Planescape and Dark Sun, like Brahms artwork was amazing. So this is the stuff that when I see it now, even though my memory of 2E is like, well, maybe one of you is better, all the people and everything that formed my gaming in my head was all 2E stuff. So when you look back, you kind of go, but look at the 1E books. My 1E books are beat to crap. My 2E books, though, the bindings broke on because I had the first printings. I don't know who to blame for that crap.
Steve can throw somebody under the bus. Yeah, I think I'm on my third. I'm on about my third set of books now because we played first edition, and for those who don't know, Steve and I guess John Pickens and Zeb Cook were the kind of the movers and shakers between 2E.
There's my
There's his first edition.
Yeah, there you go.
In 1978, something like that.
Oh my gosh, he still has it.
Nice.
Just in case, yeah.
Script inside there because I was,
Yeah, mine's in like pencil in the upper left-hand corner. Just so nobody would walk away with my book. Damn.
Yeah, well, yeah, that was a purchase like that when you're in college. That's several nights worth of drinking. Went into buying a book like that, so you took good care of it.
I sold all my original books, guys. I did. I really did. I got rid of it because I want something newer. When I started buying and selling, collecting D&D in the early 90s, when I really got serious about it, I wanted a nicer copy. So I was like, oh, my old beat up copy. Yeah, those, I don't know if I guess I didn't have any sentimental value to them. So those are, now I still have my original 2E books. Matter of fact, they're signed by Zeb and by Steve. So that's cool. Mm-hmm. And I may have some more for you to sign this next week, Steve, because my group. I was just saying this before we came on. We're playing Greg Gillespie's Highfell. We're using 2E rules because that's something we are all familiar with. We enjoy 2E. To us, 2E was improved 1E, and so yes, one of the first things I had to do when we started playing was to find everybody 2E books because nobody had their original books anymore. But they were too hard to find, and so yes, I may have you sign a few books. We'll talk a little bit about 2E. We'll talk about a bunch of stuff. We're like I said, we were really excited to have you on because we figured you were way too highbrow for this show. There was we're not going to be able to. I mean, Jeff maybe because Jeff's a little he's sketchy. He's a sketchy guy, but you were just way too highbrow. So we weren't sure, but yeah, we were really excited to have you on because the whole month we've been doing. Tell Jeff he's sketchy, but no, we'll have. We'd love to have Jeff on sometime. Well, we will have Jeff on this summer. Maybe we'll see if we can get him on. But he thinks he's a really important guy. He's always got stuff going on and stuff. So, no, but we were really excited to have you because this whole month we've had guests from North Texas and we had Jason Braun, Ben Burns. We had who else? We had Ben Barsh.
Alex.
Who am I missing here? We had somebody here.
Alex Cameron.
Alex Kamer. Oh, I'm missing the guy we had last week. Alex Kamer. Yeah, I heard of him. And so, yeah, we were just really lucky to get you. And you've had a busy month, so thanks so much for coming on. And the reason we're having the shows is because we have North Texas coming up next week. So a week from tonight, Eric and I will be there. And I don't know when you get in, Steve, but we'll be ready to do some gaming.
Yeah, I'm flying in Wednesday afternoon. The Wednesday night Get It On, whatever it's called. That's actually one of my favorite parts of the con.
The pre-con
Get It On. I have some great memories. I have some great memories of that because one of my favorite memories of the pre-con Get It On was you running Knights of Camelot with Errol Otis playing, which I thought was awesome. That was pretty cool.
Yep,
you had a full table. You must have had 8 people playing that night.
Yeah.
And that's a cool game. I have not played that in decades. I need to play that again. But the pre-con Get It On is fun because we don't normally feature board games, but Wednesday night is a night that anybody can show up and anybody can bring board games. And somebody's threatening to play some Divine Right, so we may have some good old-fashioned old school TSR going on there. So that's cool. It'll be great to see you. Now, Steve did not come to our first convention, but I believe you've come from our second and every one since then.
Yeah,
except for last year, which was a anomaly. Yeah.
Yes, you've
been a pretty reliable guest. Also.
Oh, the
you ran online. That's right. Yeah.
That's the highlight of the year for me, right? That's like my annual trip to Cancun or something. I love that show. So. Yeah.
All right. We won't tell the other conventions. We won't tell Alex that you said that, or anybody, or Luke that you said that. But it's funny because when the first year we had a few people, and the second year, Doug's really furious about. He will cold call anybody. I mean, he's cold called Monty Cook and Larry Elmore, Margaret Weiss. I mean, Tracy. So. I don't even know if I was 100% sure you were showing up. And then we get to the second convention and you're there. And I'm like, who's this dude? Because I'd never seen a picture of him. I mean, and they're like, oh, it's Steve Winter. I'm like, how did we get Steve Winter? Because I understand why we get guys like, Frank Mentz. I'm not saying anything bad about Frank Mentz or Tim Cass, but, their day was an older day. And you're still working in the business. You were still in the business putting out stuff with WotC.
Yeah,
so I'm like, okay.
As far
we actually have a guy.
How do you get me at a con?
Because you've done 5 years.
Basically, invite me and buy me a plane ticket.
Oh, wow.
That was one of the things I always remember Frank Mentz saying is that don't be afraid to ask somebody, because a lot of us old folks will get on the plane if you buy the ticket. if you have a ticket in a hotel room, we're there. And so we took that seriously over the years. Yeah, so that was great. So it was great. And you actually, I'm sorry, go ahead, Steve.
I was going to say, like you said about Doug cold calling people. I don't remember. I don't think he called me. I think he sent me an email, and I had not even heard of the convention. But he mentioned that Janelle Jaques had been there the year before, and that if I wanted to know something about the con, I should just talk to Janelle. And so I sent her an email, and her response was. And she was referring to the very first one. And, she said, that was the best thing I did all last year was go to that convention. So,
we cheated. I've talked about this before, Steve, because we cheated having Janelle there because the first year was so cheap. We're looking for local. So we're like, okay, Dennis Astaire, we found out lives in Austin. He can drive up. Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, Janelle lives in Rockwall, which is like an hour over here. And then we actually eventually found out that Sandy Peterson lived over there, so we had him a couple times. But yeah, we're great. Steve Marsh lived in Plano. We're like, yeah, let's get you. Actually, kind of okay. We're going to actually pay other people to fly in. We're not just going to have local people drive in. But it was a pretty good lineup our first few years because we didn't have a lot of really local talent. A lot of the people had moved to the DFW area after TSR because of the computer game. A lot of the computer game companies, Coleco and stuff, were running out of Texas. So Texas had a lot of the computer game people. But yeah, that was great, and you ran some of your own adventures, and we later on published them as little digests, which was extremely helpful because we were not making a lot of money in those days. We're talking like 100, 150 people would show up, but we actually would sell out of these digests. We'd have these little digests printed for like $10, which in retrospect, Doug was not thinking correctly. We should have charged twice that because we're barely making our money back plus maybe $500, because of printing. So we should have charged $20 for those digests. But we had these digests, and you were very gracious enough to offer to let us print some of yours. Really, I think pretty much anything you've ran there over the past 10 years or so. And so that really helped a lot. We needed the extra money really bad. So we need to get back in the habit of that. And we don't do that anymore. But
some of those little adventures were really cool. And you're right. You guys were undercharging for them. So, but live and learn.
One of my coolest moments was I've had a bunch of cool moments with the con, and one of them was Errol Otis wanting to play in my game, which was cool. But one of the other cool moments was I get a message a few years ago out of the blue from John Rateliff, who wants to know if I have any copies of your old digests. And I think we ended up figuring it out. I think we had PDFs or something. But I'm like, whoa, John Rateliff, because that most people know him. He's not just worked for TSR, but he's probably one of the world's foremost Hobbit scholars. I mean, he's written a great book on the Hobbit, and just a cool guy. I mean, he knows everything about Lord of the Rings and Tolkien. So that was really cool. I just kind of received this email, and I'm like, oh my God, I don't have a copy of it. I want to get John Rateliff wants a copy, and I don't have a copy. But I think we figured it. We either found him a copy or we found him a PDF.
If I could get a copy of it, and I only had one of each one because, as you said, there were so few of them were printed. So Doug gave the authors one copy each. And I liked it so much, I really wanted to hang on to that. In fact, right now, I think most of my copies of those little books I keep in my copy of
nice,
which is
nice.
Like
Dungeon-esque, yes.
My one of my frequent rules references, because it's a lot easier to look things up in those little books than some of the big rule books.
Oh God! Yeah.
But by the way, the author of Dungeon-esque, Stan Shin. Stan Shin did not know that you were using Dungeon-esque, and I blew his mind last year when I told him. I don't know how he'd never found. I thought I told him before, but I never did. I said, that Steve Winter uses your box set to run 5e. Absolutely blew his mind. He's a nice guy, but yeah, it is a good little box set and very easy to use if you're running a stripped down version of 5e.
It's so much easier to carry to a convention than the big hardback books. So.
Right.
Although this year I'm going
Steve,
back and using mostly the Moldvay Cook basic expert rules again. So because I really like
my favorite con rule. My favorite con rule set's the BX. Every year we use it for my B1 game, and we've had to look in the rule book twice in the past 15 years or 13 years. Twice.
Yeah. I have to look up spells, and that's the main thing. So
we had to look up how far an arrow went and the distance, I think, of a magic missile. That was it for the last 13 years. So you started you have a long history with TSR slash WotC. You started in 1980, I believe, with
81.
TSR.
81.
Were you
81?
Okay, you're a graduate of high school. If that makes you feel older, you probably weren't a whole lot older than I was at the time, though. But so you started.
I was only a year out of college, so
okay. Well, so what was your first job there? I mean, how did you get a job there, and what was your first job at TSR?
So I got the job there in just about the most mundane way imaginable. I graduated from college from Iowa State University. I had a degree in journalism, and I got a job as a newspaper reporter at the Peoria Journal-Star in the fall of 1980. And then I was, I played D&D, and I had gone into a hobby shop there, and I was thumbing through an issue of The Dragon, which I did not buy, right? I just read it in the hobby shop because I was a poor, underpaid newspaper reporter.
Oh, yeah.
And, but there was an ad in the back of the Dragon saying, you know, TSR wants to hire an editor. If you're, you know, if you're an editor, send your resume. So, you know, I sent my resume. I had an interview. I got the job. I mean, as I say, I know so many people working at TSR who went through all kinds of weird gyrations to land a job there. But for me, it was like I looked in the classifieds and I sent a resume. So,
wow.
Although the actual
really
hiring process is kind of insane because I had this just beat up dog of a VW Beetle that I was driving at the time, and when I had an interview arranged at TSR, and driving up there, I only got about halfway, and my car broke down, and it just absolutely, it just absolutely would not run.
Oh, that's the Volkswagen from back then.
You know, I had to find, and this is 1981, right? So I had to find a phone booth, call Doug Bloom, who was the hiring guy at TSR at the time, tell him, I'm sorry, I can't be there. So they rescheduled. I got my car fixed, drove up, had my interview. That went fine. Well, they sent me home with an editing test, which was a whole nother story. But when I sent that back, they liked it. And I had a conversation with Doug on the phone that left me with the impression that I was hired, right? That it was like, pack all your belongings in your VW Beetle. We want you here, you know, drive up and, you know, we'll point you to a desk. So I did that. I loaded all my belongings into my Beetle and I headed up there, and it broke down again.
Oh, geez.
Although this time it broke down in like Delavan or someplace. It was very close to Lake Geneva when it broke down. So I just had the car towed in to Lake Geneva, and I was only a little bit late to get there. Only then I find out, I think something happened between the time they called me, because again, I would swear I came off that phone call with the impression that I was hired. But when I got there, I was told, no, you're not hired. This is a second round of interviews. And at that point, a bunch of other people wanted to interview.
Oh, Jesus.
You know, and so it was like I had to get my car repaired, turn around, drive back home again. That was pretty crushing. And then like a week later, I got another call saying, okay, this time for sure, you're hired.
I would have been gun shy at that point. Jesus.
Yeah. So, and that time my car did not break down. So, but it was my fourth trip to Lake Geneva.
Well,
and
the
plot twist, you still have that VW. You still have it.
No. No, I do not still have that VW.
Isn't that the generation of cars that used to float? Or at least that's how they used to Volkswagen.
Yeah, they used to have that ad about, you know, VWs definitely float, but not definitely. So
yeah, well, because my family had a VW Fastback, and what I remember of it is my father would only use the horn sparingly because the spare tire actually was the air for the horn. So if you used your horn too much, your spare tire would be flat, and you had trunk space in the front and the back, but the engine was in the back, and you couldn't put any perishables in the back because it would cook them.
Yeah.
And even as a kid, I was like, not a good design.
I mean, my Beetle definitely would not have floated because there were so many holes in the floorboard of it from rust. There were times when I was working in Peoria and I would drive back and forth to my folks' home in Iowa, and I would always, whenever after a long drive, I was always so tired. I could never figure out, why am I always so tired at the end of a long drive?
No.
And it was like the third or fourth time it happened before I realized I was not tired. I was dying from carbon monoxide poisoning. The car was just, because those old Beetles, they used the exhaust as part of the heating system. They ran it through channels to warm up the car, and it was just pumping exhaust straight into the car. And so after that, I mean, in the summer, it wasn't a problem because I would have all the windows open. But in the winter, you know, in Illinois and Iowa, it was cold as heck out, and you had to have everything closed up. So I took to when I drove in the winter, I would put on my parka with the hood up and my big mittens, and I would throw a big blanket over my lap, and I'd run the heater full blast to keep my legs and my feet warm, but I'd have the windows open so the cold air was blowing through the car, and I wasn't dying from carbon monoxide.
So for our younger listeners who complain about today's cars, you don't have AC or heated seats, and you're complaining. This is the reality from the 70s and 80s.
Luckily, you didn't get tired and pull over one day and just try to take a little nap in the car with the engine running, because we would have never had the last 40 years of Steve Winter goodness.
They would have found me under an underpass, just a skeleton in a car, like one of those, a skeleton in a spacesuit, right? Yeah, for a short time, Steve Sullivan had a Beetle too. So we were like the Beetle brothers for a while.
So you ended up moving. So you moved to Lake Geneva. You were editor. When was your first writing assignment? When you actually had something like that? Hey, there, you can write. Well, we're going to let you write something here.
It was pretty far into.
Was that before second edition or after?
Oh, it would have been before. I think definitely before. Part of it too is that we were all, even as editors, the editing process at TSR at that time was very hands-on. It was not at all uncommon where you'd be. It was not like fiction editing where you would, go through and make comments and then send it back to the author for a rewrite, because whoever the designer was, by the time it came to the editor, the designer was on to something else and had no time to think about or go back and revise what they had done previously. Unless it was really a major thing. So what typically happened was, if you had big concerns, you went back and talked to the designer and said, here's my issue, here's how I would like to fix it. And typically the designer, whoever that might be, would look at it and say, yeah, that sounds fine to me. And then, the editor would go back and rewrite sometimes fairly significant portions of rules. So there was a lot of writing going on all the time. Even though you were technically an editor, we were editor/developers, and we did a lot of pretty hefty revision on some things. But I think the first thing where I actually got a writing credit was probably A Mighty Fortress, so that would have been
that was 2E. That was.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about 2E a little bit then. So we had so you were editor for a while, and then all of a sudden Gary's ousted.
It was either A Mighty Fortress or the Complete Psionics Handbook. Might have been Psionics.
Oh, okay. Where Psionics actually became usable in AD&D. I remember that. Well, compared to 1E.
So Gary gets ousted, and Lorraine won. So I think Jim Ward in charge of it, and he put you and Zeb and John on this to, hey, we need another edition of the game. What was interesting about 2E was I remember that it was in the works for a while, because I remember the survey that came out in Dragon Magazine, like, what would you like to see in our game? And you had this big, it was like a 4 or 5 page survey. Did you all actually look at those surveys and say, hey, this is what people want, we're going to do? Wow.
Absolutely.
Well, our voice was actually heard. That's awesome.
Yes.
That's great.
Yeah. We took that feedback really seriously. Now, we didn't.
So how long was this?
We also got a huge amount of letters from people. We didn't take all the letters seriously because some of them were obviously written by cranks, But actually, one of my favorite stories about second edition was a guy who wrote in, and this was fairly typical, because I think Zeb or somebody had written an editorial in Dragon. We had regular editorials in Dragon about what was going on with second edition. And a guy wrote in very angry, just saying this was the worst idea ever. why would we mess with AD&D? The game was fine as it was, all that kind of thing. And Mike Dobson, who was one of the department managers at the time, wrote back to the guy a very nice letter saying, no, I think you misunderstand what we're trying to do. We're not revising the game. We're not really changing the game. It's going to be the same as it always was. Our primary goal is just, as you were saying earlier, is to clean everything up, right? To make the rule books more accessible so that anyone can pick them up and understand how the game is played without pouring huge amounts of effort into it. And the guy wrote back another letter saying, no, I understand perfectly. That's exactly what I object to. I poured hundreds of hours into figuring out and mastering these arcane rules. And now you're going to make that all worthless by making it accessible to anyone. And, all my accumulated arcane knowledge will count for nothing. So
there was a strain of gamer that... I remember at the time when 2E came out, my group we played for 1E since '78, but we loved 2E because, like I said, we thought it was actually a more accessible, cleaned up version of 1E. We had a lot of friends that we broke off with at the time because they were not going to touch 2E with a 10-foot pole, and that was kind of the original. Well, I guess the original gamers. Well, there was two gamer schisms. There was the OD&D and D&D, but even before that, there was the OD&D and the War Gamers. That was a huge schism. I remember being part of that, where I had the friends that played Squad Leader. And they couldn't understand why we're playing that stupid game with elves and dragons, and it's dumb. There's just dice. There's no hexes. How do you know how far to move? Blah blah. And then you had the OD&D versus 1E people, but that wasn't anything like 1E versus 2E. That was the first huge edition war.
And I mean,
was the 1E versus the 2E people, because the 1E people.
In those early years, I've talked about this in quite a few different places. In those early years, in the 70s, there was, when it was originally, you had the three little books, and then suddenly you had the Holmes version of the game, which was essentially a cleaned up version of the three little books, and then you had the Moldvay Cook version of Basic and Expert D&D, which really was a different game. I mean, a lot of the math is different. A lot of the details, it looks the same to a casual observer, but a lot of the details are different. And then you had just, third-party material coming from everywhere, coming from Judges Guild, coming from, the Complete Warlock, Alarms and Excursions. Everybody was putting out supplemental material. And material in the Dragon. When we sat down to play D&D in the 70s, all that stuff was piled up on the table, and people were pulling from everything, whether it was compatible or not, right? You just made it work. People were you'd pull in things from RuneQuest and from Chivalry and Sorcery and play them in D&D. That idea of edition warring, it just didn't really exist at the time. The second edition was kind of the first place where there was an effort to make a clean break from there was a before and there was an after, right?
Right.
So yeah, I'm not surprised that it caused.
So talk about.
We knew it would, right? But it was. We also knew that it had to be done.
Tell me how you worked on me. So I know I see the names on there. It says you and Zeb Cook and John Pickens. What was your actual job there? I mean, how did you what was the system you used to actually work on the? Did you not do anything else at the company and just come into work and work 2E every day, or how did that work out?
Yeah. That was one of the best years I ever had at TSR. Everybody had cubicles.
Everybody left you alone. They all left you alone.
Yeah. They actually, Zeb and I, instead of, we got moved out of our cubicles up in what was called Cube Land on the second floor, and we got moved into down to the first floor into an area that was largely empty. I don't remember exactly. It might have been marketing at one time. They were always shuffling people around down on the first floor. But we got actual offices down in this corner of the building that was not really being used. So it was dead quiet down there. It was just Zeb and I in two side-by-side offices. And Zeb wrote, and as soon as he wrote the stuff, he kicked it over to me, and I started going through and doing development. There was a lot more back and forth at that point than on a typical project, right? Because we would sit and talk about things, bounce ideas off of each other. In terms of responsibility, though, I mean, Zeb was responsible for designing the systems and putting the initial words on paper, and then I was responsible. I had created a huge outline previous to this. That was one of the first things that happened. Even before Zeb sat down and started writing, I had gone through the two books, the DMG and the Player's Handbook, and created an immense outline for Zeb to work from. But then he just wrote like crazy, and he kicked it over to me, and I, edited it like crazy and kind of rearranged things, kicked them back to him where I thought they needed more development. He'd send them back to me. And John's role was primarily, he was kind of a combination of traffic cop, making sure that we were keeping on track, not, bogging down anywhere. But also primarily, John coordinated the play testing, which was an enormous job all by itself. Right? He had a 3x5 index card file of play testers that was literally like 2 feet long. Because remember, this was all pre-internet, right? So all names and phone numbers and addresses were all on these index cards. And there were a lot of play testers on that project who, many of them fed us. We got great feedback from a lot of the play testers. So,
yeah, I was going to ask you about the play testing too, because that was I remember at the time I had some friends that actually were part of they had filled out something and sent in something. They actually got play tested rules. I thought was the coolest thing of all time back then. Of course, now it's not as impressive now, but back then I was like, whoa, you're play testing the new D&D. So can you think of anything that you changed because of play testing? Was there something that you and Zeb thought, okay, this is going to really work? And then play testing was like, no, that is not going to work.
No, sorry, I really don't. Zeb might remember more so than I do, since he would have been the guy making a lot of those changes. Nothing springs to mind, but I'm sure there were plenty of things. And of course, there was playtesting going on in-house too. We had most of the R&D crew at various times playtesting different things. So.
Now I know that you've probably been asked this question. I've probably asked this of you. So the big conspiracy theory among gamers was that, 2E was only created because Lorraine Williams didn't want to pay Gary any royalties for 1E. Is that any truth to that? Was that just a story that disgruntled old school grognards shared among themselves?
I can't say that was at a zero level of motivation, but that it was not a motivating factor that really amounted to anything. Because I can attest that Lorraine and the executive board, it took a lot of persuading to make them believe that this was necessary for the long-term health of the game. Mm-hmm. They were terrified of the idea that because we had a huge backlog of titles, right? The back catalog was a big part of the company's revenue, and so if all of that suddenly becomes obsolete, the TSR was going to take an enormous financial hit, and that was a big part of why we weren't allowed to make a lot of the changes that we wanted to make and that ultimately were made in third edition, because one of the directives was people should be able to pick up a first edition adventure, against the giants or something, and still play that adventure with second edition rules. That's why Armor Class did not reverse direction.
Right.
We stuck with THACO, things like that, because we specifically were not allowed to make previous products obsolete, at least previous adventures. I mean, a lot of it.
But now, Gary had already announced in Dragon Magazine that he was already toying with the idea of a second edition. So, I mean, I remember as a gamer reading Dragon and going, "Oh, this looks interesting. I have these new classes that we're going to see after Unearthed Arcana," which we didn't see in second edition. But I don't really recalling that I missed them all that much anyway. Like Savant was like, who really cared that Savant didn't show up in 2E.
Yeah.
But for me, my gaming group, the big conspiracy was, well, they did 2E to get rid of evil character classes and demons and devils. That was the big rewrite in my gaming group. So,
and again, that was not why it happened, but those were targets of opportunity.
I can see it now, definitely, yes.
Yeah, I mean, because there definitely were people within the company. The whole, the '80s satanic panic. I mean, that was a big deal at TSR. That it hurt us. There's no question about it. And things like that awful hit piece that 60 Minutes did on D&D was, that was terrible. Even though at the same time you can look back and things like the J. Dallas Egbert incident actually helped D&D. That kind of put D&D on the map, because suddenly people who'd never heard of the game were hearing about it.
Right.
So it sort of cuts both ways, but yeah, there were things like Demons and Devils. And honestly, I did not shed a single tear over any of that. I thought that the new terms, calling them, Tanari and what was it?
Biatsu or something like that.
Yeah, I thought those were actually far more evocative terms for them than Demon and Devil, which I think are kind of bland. So
listen.
Beatazu, Tanari and Beatazu. Yeah, I always thought
as a fanboy at the time, was I a little upset? Yes. Then again, at the same time, I was minorly relieved, because my great aunt, who would visit every once in a while, was a Catholic nun who didn't believe in Vatican II, with the black habit and the Latin Mass, and called my parents to tell them that I was a devil worshiper, and I had these D&D books with spells in them. And my parents, because they were in the Poconos on vacation, God bless them, just said, "Listen, we know you have other games. Just play like Traveler or one of those other games that you have. And when Norma leaves, just play D&D. But for now, in a couple of days, just humor." But yeah, it was. The Satanic Panic was definitely huge back then. And in retrospect, like I said, shortly after the shock of going, where's my section on demons and devils? After I got past that shock, I was like, oh, well, you know what? I guess it really, as a fantasy game, relabeling them kind of worked out much better. And especially in my extended household, when my aunt would visit, it was like, oh, thank God, I can kind of playing. We're not playing Advanced Dungeons and Dragons. We're playing a game that has scraped those things off the serial numbers are gone.
Well, it took some of the ammunition that the bad people and the people BADD bought against, those kind of people would try to throw at D&D. It took away some of their ammunition, which I always thought was a good marketing move, because without being able to point to devils and demons, now they can still point at the picture and say this is a devil, and you see it in the book, but it doesn't say devil or demon there. So I think it helped. I think it helped immensely, because I think that
if you look at those pictures, this is kind of an amusing side note, because along with changing the names, all the illustrators were given instructions that they could not have pointy tails. Horns, little devil horns and pointy tails were also right out. I remember Jim
I never
Ward,
even noticed. That's interesting.
so many times.
Discrimination
Jim Ward
against
would over to the art department
tails.
and say, no pointy tails.
It's got horns.
Yeah.
Well, we like horns
really
and pointy tails in
scraping
North
the
Texas.
serial numbers off of. Yeah. Well, yeah. Little Mr. Devil over here.
We don't mind horns.
In, second edition.
No, we like horns here, but I thought it was a good marketing move. I like the only thing I remember about 2E. So Eric and I agree on this, that 2E was a great. I mean, we loved it. The fall of 2E began with the proliferation of splat books, and at that was the point when hey, this is a really fun game to like. Dear God, does there have to be a book about every single class and every single character? And that's where we get the famous Blade Singer story about how all the campaigns that were destroyed by Blade Singers, because as I understand it, these books were never play tested. As you told me years ago, Steve, which I couldn't believe. I was like, these books were not play tested? Like, no, not at all.
Not in any rigorous way, no. The writers may have done some play testing at home, but there was no. We were churning things out so fast. There was no time for in-house playtesting at that time, and it was. I mean, we realized fairly early on that obviously something you can sell to players, you're going to sell a lot more of than things that you can only sell to DMs.
Yeah.
That was the motivation for creating the.
Sure.
All the I don't think we really had the term splat book at the time. I'm not sure where that came from, but that was what spurred that on. And some of the excesses, like the Blade Singer. I mean, I have to be honest here and admit that I have a large share of blame for those, because that was. I mean, it was my product line. I was kind of the final backstop, right? I'm the guy who should have put the brakes on it, but I was so busy with my own other projects that that I wasn't able to review them in the kind of depth that it really required either. So if the author thought it was okay and the editor didn't catch it, the rather cursory review I was able to give those books was insufficient to catch those kinds of things.
Well, it's funny because I'm going to actually place blame in my home campaign on the mail order hobby shop, because I placed an order for one splat book and one poster, and I get this huge box sent to my house, and I open it up, and it's every splat book but no poster, and I'm looking. And I had a few of them already. It's a few of the complete handbooks, but it's everyone that was out at that time. It was like, I don't know, 8, 9. I'm like, holy crap. So, of course, the duplicates I gave out to my gaming group, and now I had one of everything. So I have these all. And then I start getting phone calls from the mail order hobby shop that apparently they sent somebody else my poster and sent me. And at the time, my roommate was in law school. And I was like, dude, what do I do? I was in college, like, I don't know. I was like, what do I do? What do I do? He goes, well, what did you order? I go, I ordered a book and a poster. All right, what'd you pay for? I go, a book and a poster. You didn't request anything else, right? Like, no. He goes, don't answer the phone calls. That's why you have an answering machine. I'm like, is it a legal standard? He goes,
yeah.
He goes, it's their screw up, because then someone's like, you have to ship them back at your cost. I was like, ship them back at my cost? I'm not the ass that sent me all this stuff. But in the end, like I said, that's how before that, I had the book of Complete Elves. Nobody else in my group did. And I hadn't really read it at that time. So I was like, oh, I got an extra book. And I handed it out. Next thing I was like, I want to be a Blade Singer. I'm like, yeah, sure. Look. Okay.
It's been play tested.
Yeah.
This winter guy would have never put this stuff out if it wasn't play tested.
How bad could it be? And then you're like, oh my God. It's like, listen, as a player, it wasn't bad at all. I'm sure my friend Dave, and I'll have to have Dave listen to this episode. Dave was in his own zone, loving his character Leviathan, the Blade Singer, who was not going to get killed by anything. Unless you assassinated them when they were dead, but there were no assassins in 2E, so that wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
But
the corollary to all of this is that there was also when we first started working on second edition and all through it, we adopted a pretty forward philosophy that game balance is not up to us. Okay,
fair enough.
And this is an issue that goes all the way back through AD&D. And if you were playing in the 70s, you ran into this all the time at conventions, and even in the 80s, it was still very common. Where, as the people publishing the game, we have no control over what individual DMs are doing within their campaigns, right? And to the idea that all fifth level characters should be of equal power, or even the idea that all characters with 40,000 XP, no matter what level they are, should be of approximately equal power. We thought that was a ludicrous idea. It was laughable, because in one campaign that a fifth level character might have nothing but mundane equipment, and in some other campaign a fifth level character is running around with a Vorpal sword and a backpack full of other magic items. So our very intentional philosophy was that game balance is far more in the hands of the DM than us. We cannot control it. So if one character comes out and and it's more powerful than another, well, that's just the way it works, right? The DM has the monster hit that guy harder, right? Now the Blade Singer was kind of off the chart. So, even that fairly forgiving philosophy has limits. It has an upper and a lower limit, and the Blade Singer fell outside that range. But
I mean, 2E for me as a gamer, I always loved the Bard as a concept. I hated the 1E Bard because it broke every rule. It's like half elves couldn't dual class, but if you're going to be a Bard, you can dual class. But you're not dual classing, you're triple classing, and you don't need this. As a kid that was focused on running as written, it's like, but this doesn't work as the rules were written, and I'm confused. Yeah. And I like the Bard in issue 56 of the Dragon. That's what I played when I had an opportunity at DM that would allow it. So when 2E came out, it was like, there's an actual Bard class. And my group is underpowered. To me, it didn't matter because it was an actual playable Bard class. To me, Bards were never meant to be powerful. They were meant to be the jack of all trades. If you needed somebody who could fight, they could slide in. You needed a spellcaster. They were never going to steal the thunder, but they would certainly fill in the gaps when needed, and sometimes save the party's ass in a nonchalant way. So I thought that was a great way to handle the Bard in 2E.
Yeah.
And you'll have to create that in a whole, because that wasn't based on really the first edition Bard. That was a whole creation into itself. So how did y'all figure out, we need a playable Bard class. The first edition version is not going to work. So what did you decide on that? Well,
and the way the Bard turned out was not all that close to what Zeb wanted. The Bard stuck pretty close to what players wanted, right? What we got in feedback from players, which is the Alan Adale, the singing Bard, kind of the singing storytelling Bard. Because Zeb's idea of the Bard was Zeb at the time, you hardly ever saw Zeb walking around where he didn't have some Viking saga, a paperback edition of some Viking saga tucked in his hip pocket.
So he wanted a Skull type of deal. He wanted the Viking storyteller.
He wanted, much more of a Beowulf kind of character.
Right.
A great fighter who, splits his time between fighting great battles and then just bragging about it to everybody who he can get to listen. But that was not what the players wanted, it seemed. So that's we went in the other direction, which is kind of a shame because I think that that much more Nordic Skald kind of character would have been a really interesting thing. Somebody who goes on adventures just so they can have things to brag about.
No, definitely are. Like I said, I've always liked the Bard class as a concept, and I actually the complete book of Bards was like, I was like, wow, they've got these different takes on the Bard, which kind of went a little bit more Skald-like, I guess, or a little bit more.
It was actually one of the better complete books because they actually had the Skald in there, Eric. That was actually one of the better complete books, was the Bard book, because they had the Skald, they had some different varieties. So as much as I love 2E, have to ask you who to blame for this decision. The monster binder, which would seem like a great idea. Look at it.
That was all on me.
It was a great idea. Not very good execution for different reasons, but it was a great idea. So you have this binder, and you buy these monster packs, and as you need the monsters, you trade them in and out. But unfortunately, you would have one monster on one side, the monster on the other side. Then when you found another monster that fit between both of those, they wouldn't go. And you had some physical problems. The pages didn't always tear right, and the little holes would get torn. And after a while, I think I've got a box of those in my garage. Just they're all thrown in there, and eventually, I guess y'all gave up and just published a hardcover book. So that was your brainchild. It was a great idea. It was a great idea.
Advanced Squad Leader was hitting big at that time, and I played Advanced Squad Leader, and I really loved the way the rules were in a 3-ring binder, and as they published supplements, you fed those into the binder, and when they did errata, you just took the wrong page out and put the corrected page in, and so that was sort of the model for it. It was a bit of a hard sell, because the guys in purchasing were very concerned that we weren't going to be able to bring it in. We weren't going to be able to sell it at a price where we would make money on it, right? But honestly, as you say, I think it was a good idea that just it as it grew, it became unwieldy. Another amusing side story to that, the problem you're talking about, where one monster has to feed in between two other monsters, that's why the spelling of Ankeg was changed. If you remember, in first edition, I think it was like ANHKHEG, and in second edition we dropped the first H. It was just ANKHEG, I believe. That was to move it slightly within the alphabetization so that the pages would break the way we need.
Wow.
Nice.
Just changing names to make it fit. That's a good solution. But, well, like I said, it was a great idea, because you could buy, they had the Ravenloft one, they had the Greyhawk one, the Forgotten Realms, so you could buy whatever one you thought. But to this day, when I buy somebody's D&D collection, there's always this big box, and you open it up, and sure enough, there's a bunch of binders, a bunch of loose monster sheets in there, and you're like, oh, okay, so it was a great idea in theory, but execution, it would just end up with all these monster sheets everywhere. And it was almost a blessing when y'all decide, you know what, let's just have a hardcover.
And unfortunately the pages were kind of the paper that was used for those supplements was kind of flimsy.
It was it had a lot of issues.
If you didn't reinforce the hole, the punched holes, the pages would rip out.
Yeah, with those loose leaf sticker thingies that anybody in the current generation has no. If you're younger than 40, you have no idea what we're talking about. But when you had like book reports and stuff, you had to you had these little ringlets you had to put on your pages. So
lick them.
Yeah,
lick them on every.
I was going to go get my binders over here. Maybe it's
John Miller comments that he played 2 as a young lad. Played it for years, but at the 30, he returned to 1E. However, 2E's combat chapter is comprehensible without a sanity check. And that is probably one of the first things. Again, we pretended we were running as written for 1E, but we didn't understand combat as written in 1E. And there were a lot of things that After those first couple of sessions where you ran with segments and spell interruption, suddenly you realized that having 2 combats in 3 hours, you had to start dropping stuff, and we didn't call it house rules.
No.
But now you call it a house rule. Then it was just we can't. It was too much. We were 13.
And did you ever use speed factors?
You know what? Speed factors broke my head.
Armor adjustments.
No, armor adjustments. we were like, but how does it apply to monsters? Obviously, it doesn't. So we don't care. We'll just pretend it doesn't exist. But weapon speed and the idea that if there was a tied initiative, then a dagger could strike like 3 times before a 2-handed sword. I could never make heads or tails of it. And then I remember Dragon Magazine had some article trying to explain weapon speed, and what it came down to, it was like, listen, if there's a tied initiative and you got a shorter weapon, you'll go first. But other than that, we just don't care. Because it really did hurt my teenage mind. And at 53, I refused to go back to hurting my mind on things like that.
Yeah. We had as we were developing second edition, and Zeb was talking about radically altering and simplifying the initiative rules. One of the other reasons why John Pickens was part of that initial trio on the rules is because John, I would say, of everybody within the TSR building, John knew the first edition rules better than anyone else, and he was their most vocal supporter. He really liked those rules. And when Zeb was talking about changing the initiative rules, he got into a conversation about that with John, where John tried to explain why the existing rule was fine, but he couldn't actually explain how it worked.
Therein lies the difficulty. Yeah.
Saying, well, but what about this? And then John saying, well, you would handle that this way. And Zeb saying, but that contradicts what happens in this other situation. And then John saying, well, yeah, but how often do those situations ever happen at the same time? And Zeb saying, well, in my game, they happen at the same time a lot. When it got to the point where, even John could not adequately defend the initiative rules in first edition, that was all the evidence we needed that they were bad rules.
It was over.
Yeah, there was just too many fiddly bits, and it was like, okay, well, it's in addition to the speed factor, and the segments, then you had to worry about missiles and spells and then God forbid you were throwing surprise into the situation, and then everything else started falling apart.
And did you use the helmet rule?
Yeah.
Oh, never. Find the helmet rule until I was rereading my.
It would always shock you when you ran across it. You'd always forget about it. Like, oh my gosh, this helmets. Was it 5% of the time a blow is directed at the head? Like, you always forgot that rule. Yeah. And then some rules lawyer would bring it up every once in a while. I'm like, oh yeah, I totally forgot about that one. I thought the rules. 2E rules were. I think they're very easy to teach. I taught a lot of people to play second edition more than probably any other edition except for BX. BX is an extremely easy version, but I spent way more. I taught a lot of people 2E, and it was actually a very. I wouldn't say it's an elegant system, but it's a very. It makes sense. A lot of the things that happen in there make sense within the structure of the rules. And it's probably not the best rules set you could ever create, but the fact that you had to build on 1E and it had to be backwards compatible with 1E, which I thought was a really good idea, because we did use a lot of first edition modules. We used a lot of first edition stuff with second edition, and so that helped make the game more. That was more utility to the game right there.
Yeah. It's. Until 5th edition came along, BX was just hands down my favorite edition of the game. And I wouldn't necessarily say that 5th edition has replaced it, but 5th edition is so close to BX in its feel in a lot of ways that I almost think of them as, I mean, not really interchangeable, but almost interchangeable. So they're definitely two favorite editions.
I mean, for me, like I find the Swords and Wizardry rules to play like we played 1E after we took out all the crap that made no sense. And that's why I feel very comfortable with it, because it's like, wow, this is pretty much how we played it after we dropped out weapon speed, spell interruption, and other stuff that just made us scratch our heads and go, do you understand? No? All right, we'll move on and pretend we never heard about it. Yeah. But I was somebody that never played BX until I was an adult, because when I was a teen, advanced or basic, well, only children will play basic. What the... Yeah. Why would I ever want to play basic?
Yeah.
Yeah, we really wanted to drop the advanced off of it and just call it D&D, but it had to stay for legal reasons, and that was one of the things that when Wizards of the Coast took over the property, and I give Peter Adkison a lot of credit for, he finally just stepped up to the plate and said, look, we're gonna settle this stupid decades-old legal quarrel between TSR and Dave Arneson, so we can, we're gonna pay Dave his dues and start using the name Dungeons and Dragons again, because that's what people want. So,
yeah.
Right.
No, that was good, because, I mean, I think even if we just had called Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, and you had a basic, people, stupid teenagers wouldn't have been like, whoa, all right, I could play D&D or I could play basic D&D. All right, well, basic's a little bit, a little bit less confusing, as opposed to, well, no, I'm elite because I play advanced. And that's really how, as teenagers, we viewed it as. And in retrospect, as a gamer now who prefers my rules to be very complete yet easy to use. I'm the idiot that put together the Swords and Wizardry Light rules to get a comprehensive rule set out in 4 pages. I like to have things streamlined with less bloat. And I look back and at my copies of Basic, and I'm like, this would have been beautiful. I would have loved to have run this. My God, the stress of the DM would have been so much simpler. Less referring to the books. First, I'm going to do the 1E days. I mean, once Unearthed Arcana came out and your game broke for like the second time, I mean, I wouldn't have had that stress with Basic.
Yeah.
So
there was actually right after Steve Sullivan told me this story that right after the BX versions came out in 1980, that and I forget if it was Sandy Peterson or Greg Stafford that he was talking to him at Gen Con probably, and they were looking at that, and they said, whichever one of them it was who the conversation was with, said, if this game had been available in 5 years ago, RuneQuest never would have happened, because they created RuneQuest because they couldn't figure out how to play OD&D. It was
I'm sure.
Mess, right? But they loved the idea of role playing. They could see this was a brilliant concept. Just they couldn't handle the execution of it, so they created RuneQuest so they would have a game they understood. And
I'm sure Tunnels and Trolls has that same kind of root in it.
Yeah,
it's a great concept, and very confusing to get into.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah. I don't want to take anything away from OD&D, right? We all played OD&D and we loved it, but but at the same time, we had an ongoing joke whenever we were playing with those rules. There was in one of the books in Men and Magic, I think, there was a line about high constitution allows a character to withstand adversity well. And anytime something happened to a character, if you had a high constitution score, the player would say, but wait, I have a high constitution. I can
survive.
Well. because no one knew what that meant. It meant nothing essentially. So. That's
the beauty of
you just rolled with it, right? Because
right.
The concept was so brilliant.
So you did work on one of Eric's favorite games, Marvel Superheroes. You did you and Jeff did that?
I barely played it, dude. My group loved it.
I know, but you loved it. You loved it. I know.
I just never got into supers. My group, I was like, I'll play, but I won't run. That was my shtick. It wasn't against the Marvel Superheroes RPG. It was DC and Champions and Villains and Vigilantes and all that stuff. I was a comic book reader. I couldn't wrap my head around how to run a comic book game and make it fun. It takes a certain talent, and I don't think I had it. So
there's very much a.
Well, I don't know if you're much. I don't know if you're. I guess you're somewhat of a comic book fan. Did you ever meet any of the luminaries of the hobby when you were doing a little work for Marvel superheroes and then going back and forth with the Marvel people?
No, not too much. I mean, Jeff Grubb did. Jeff got to go. I think he got to go out to Marvel maybe and meet some of the guys there. The only comic book luminary I've ever met was Frank Miller, and that was
nice.
That was at a party in Hollywood when we were out there for something or other. And Flint Dilley had a party at his house, and I was standing in the kitchen and I just started chatting to some guy, and I asked him what he did. I had no idea who it was. I asked him what he did, and he said he drew comic books, and I was like, oh really? What's your name? And he said Frank Miller, and I forget what it was.
I think I've heard of you. Yeah.
Because the Dark Knight
probably Sin City
big thing at that time, right?
Oh, Dark Knight, yeah.
And but I knew Frank Miller from something else. I forget what it was.
Daredevil.
And I was like, oh, you're the guy who did Daredevil. I was like, oh, you're the guy who did Daredevil.
Daredevil was a big thing.
He was like, well, yeah, that and the Dark Knight. I was like, oh yeah, I haven't read that, but I was a big Daredevil fan.
That's my old.
But he I guess, he was in Hollywood doing all that Sin City stuff because I think they turned a bunch of the Sin City comics he did into movies, so that's probably why he was out hobnobbing in Hollywood. His expertise way back then, yeah. Well, I'm going to throw you. I'm going to throw you a curveball here, Steve.
Didn't he do like Lone Wolf and Cub? I think that was what I said.
Actually, he might have.
God.
Oh God! Now you get. All right, Mike, you're in charge. I'm going to do. I used to write Lone Wolf and Cub.
I'm going to throw you. I'm going to throw you a curveball here. So
okay.
As great a writer as you are, and as many things as you've written, how does it feel to be the second best writer in your household for quite a few years?
It was fine with me because I saw every day how hard Mary had to work on those novels, and that was something that I'm not saying that I am averse to hard work, but that was hard work.
All right,
so we're talking about Mary Kirchhoff. That's how you pronounce her last name, right? That's
yep.
That's his wife. I remember actually.
So that's Steve's wife, Mary Kirchhoff, who wrote Dragonlance. She wrote Dragonlance, Ravenloft. She's wrote all kinds of stuff. She's been a quite prolific writer. But she's that's interesting because I'll be honest, Steve. I mean, I love you, but I don't know how you got somebody that good looking to look at you in 1985. I'm looking, and it's funny because I told Kevin Hendricks the same thing about his wife Mary. I said, how did this happen? He's like, I don't know. So I mean, because I said we were geeks back then. We were nerds. We weren't pulling in good looking girls back then. But yeah, Mary was she's quite attractive woman to this still now. But yeah, that was quite an accomplishment, Steve. I'm going to give you a pat in the back for that one. I don't know how you did it, but
That's my winning personality. I made her laugh.
There you go. Frank Miller did the cover
go
for
with
the
that.
Lone Wolf and Cub English trades. And then you're right. I remember him from that. And I think somebody else said that he did Ronin. Now, you know what? I vaguely remember Ronin.
Ronin was a miniseries. It was a 6-issue miniseries. It was
okay.
It was his first thing he did, kind of, because he became real famous with Daredevil. Then he did. I'm a huge comic book wacko here, so he did Daredevil's first thing he really got famous at. Then he did Dark Knight, and then he did Ronin was kind of his first off on his own. And then after that, he didn't work a lot for the major companies after that. He really did a lot of his own stuff. He did Sin City. Sin City was his big series he did for probably the last 20 years or so. And obviously they made a few movies out of it. And he's done Batman since then. He's gotten a little odd in the last 15, 20 years. He's kind of, I don't know. He hasn't aged gracefully necessarily. I don't know how you'd put. But he's a little odd, but yeah, for a while he was probably the biggest creative person in comics for probably about 5-10 years there. He and Alan Moore and a few of those other guys in the 80s were. I mean, he was huge. I actually met him at a comic book show, and he was extremely nice, very nice guy.
And he was possibly
signed all my Daredevils, signed my whole Daredevil collection.
Yeah, he was possibly at his hugest moment at that time when I met him, and I think he was a little miffed that I didn't immediately know who he was.
You know me from my old work, or I got current work that's like
ego.
well renowned.
He does have a bit of an ego. That has been
well, and
many people test that.
Creative people in general, their egos are pretty easy to come by. So
some of those guys, I remember meeting. I've met John Byrne a few times, and John Burns, he's not as famous as he was, but he was real big in the 80s. He did Fantastic Four. He did obviously New X-Men. And he was one of those guys that had a huge ego, but he was hilarious. You talk to him and he was funny. He's a funny guy. And so I sometimes a big ego is justified, because as long as you play the game right and you don't, lord it over the little guys, it's fun to watch the guy with the big ego, stroke his own ego. I used to always like to watch Orson Welles too, because Orson Welles is one of those guys too.
Yes, there are good big egos and there are bad big egos. So,
well, we're lucky that our hobby, we mostly have good big ego people, I think, because I think the great thing about RPGs is most people that are in RPGs realize they're a big fish in a small pond type of thing, and I think that's one thing I've loved about putting North Texas on all these years is meeting these guys, and they always say don't meet your heroes, because something's going to happen or they're going to say something or do something. But I've rarely been disappointed for most of my RPG heroes. You guys have been, just really just the nicest guys. I mean, really, that's I can't think of anybody that I would name on screen, but no. I mean, most of the people are very, very much realize, look, we had our time. We're famous because we were in the right place at the right time. I mean, that's what, what happened. I mean, it wasn't that, I mean, if you look at stuff that's written now and take some of the big writers like, I don't know, Greg Gillespie or, just some of the big writers now, and their stuff, if it had been published in 1981, would have been great. I mean, it's technically even a lot better than stuff published back then, because stuff published back then was just, it was just that's what was out there. And I think the stuff published in the last 15 years is really, just really good. You read it, and especially the new 5th edition stuff is very good. It's very, very good. I mean, it's technically a lot better than the old stuff, but, so I think that's what's great about RPGs is most of you and most of your colleagues, Steve, are very humble about your accomplishments, which I think is really cool.
Well, thanks. You talk about being a big fish in a small pond, but shortly after I started coming to NTRPG Con, my mom, who was still alive at the time, asked me, what do you do at these conventions? And I said, I run games, I talk to people, I sign autographs. And she was like, really? People want your autograph? And I was like, Mom, I am very well known among a very small group of people.
There you go. And
Around
that's
this
really
small
what it
group of
comes
people,
down to.
I could get my meals paid for. Yes, they will buy me a meal in this small group of people. I can get a free lunch.
Yep.
Well, Mike, you remember my first North Texas RPG Con story with Rach. My wife, God bless her, she went to my first North Texas, and we got there Wednesday, and she wants to go into the pool. So we're in the pool, and there's one other person in the pool, and she's like, well, he must be here for the con. I'm like, why do you say that? He has that look. And I guess gamers have that look. Whatever.
Oh, dear.
Yes. So my wife.
Wait. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So my wife, Rach, she makes a little small talk, and she's like, oh, well, you're here for the con. He's like, oh, yeah, I'm here for North Texas. Oh, so you must know my husband, Eric Tenkar, because the blog was big. And listen, I got to know Mike through all this stuff, and I knew people there, but he had no clue who I was. And my wife was getting frustrated. She's like, how can you not? And I was just like, Rach, it's a small community, but what's even smaller? The break within the community. So I said to him, all right, so they go, you don't read blogs, do you? He goes, no. And this is going back a number of years. I go, so are you Dragon's Foot, OD&D? Where do you hang on the forums? I goes, oh, I'm Dragon's Foot. And my wife had no idea what I was talking about. I go, yeah, Rach, he doesn't read blogs. He reads forums. She's like, there's that kind of a division in your hobby? I'm like, yeah. And now it's even like
we're niche of a niche, yes.
Yeah, and it's like now it's podcasts, it's vidcasts, blogs are shrinking, forums are shrinking. So, it was eye opening to her because she was used to people emailing me and reaching out to me, and I said no. There are people who have no clue who I am. I like that. I like that bit of anonymity, because it brings you back to reality. Oh my God, it's Tenkar. Can you sound like, yeah, sure. I've had people go, who the hell is Tenkar? Good. Thank you. You grounded me. I like to be grounded. Thank you. I'd rather you not know who the hell I am. It means it means a lot more.
I was at I was at Game Hall Con a few years back, and I got into an elevator, and these two very attractive women got on after me, and one of them said, "Oh, Mike Battleotto, you're Bad Mike. You run North Texas RPG Con." I'm like, holy crap! I've made it. I mean, attractive young girls in hotels or in elevators know who I am, and so we talked for a while, and they got off. And so I'm telling Zach that I'm all, hey, these two young girls got on. They knew who I was. He goes, "Hey, idiot, your name's on the back of your shirt," which it was. My name was on the back of my shirt. Like, damn, you're right. But they still knew who Bad Mike was. It just says Mike Battleotto. It doesn't say Bad Mike. They knew I was Bad Mike. So there's something I was like, damn it, you're right. My name's on my shirt. Crap.
Well, here's a story about not recognizing a celebrity, not related to gaming. When I was in college, I lived in Dubuque, Iowa, and a movie. If you've ever heard of the movie "Take This Job and Shove It,"
yep,
that was filmed in the town where I grew up and where I was spending the summer when I was in college. And I got hired to be a gopher on that film, and mainly because I knew the local terrain. Right, I was there to tell people, if you need that, here's where you need to go to get it. If you're looking for this kind of location, here's where you need to go to find it. Right. But I mean, I was a gopher. I was the lowest of the low. And the day that I was hired right at the beginning. So before any shooting had started or anything, when they were just doing location scouting, that kind of stuff, I was on hand. Well, more and more crew was kind of slowly arriving. And on the day that a bunch of the electricians showed up, I got on the elevator. I was done for the day. I get on the elevator at this hotel where the offices were, and I'm riding down to go home. And there's a guy on the elevator wearing a T-shirt and ripped up jeans. And, I get on, we're just standing on the elevator, and he says, are you working on the movie? And I said, yeah, just a gopher. Are you working here? And he says, yeah. And I said, are you one of the electricians? And he says, no, I'm Robert Hayes. And I was like,
oh, ouch.
And he's like, the star of the movie. It's like, what else have you been in? You know, and he's like, Airplane. It's like, haven't seen it. Seriously, felt like a complete idiot. So I never saw him again for the whole rest of the shoot.
Well, I mean, my reverse one was again at North Texas. I'm going to get on to the elevator with my wife, and I hit the button. I didn't realize that the doors had just closed, so I hit it before it got to move. So the doors open up again, and inside is it was Jeff Grubb, and it might have been Zeb Cook, and I'm like in the doorway, and Jeff goes, "Oh my God, Eric Tenkar, I read your blog all the time," and I didn't move, and I just went, and then the doors closed, and the elevator left, and my wife's like, "What the hell just happened?" I'm like, "That's Jeff.
Who's that?"
Bro. She's like, and I was like, so now I said, this is the reverse. You know, before nobody knew who I was. Now somebody like Jeff knew who I was, and I couldn't even say anything other than. So now when I see Jeff at other conventions, he'll walk by me and wave at me as he says, like, I go, he must still remember that incident. And it's like, yeah, bye. So.
Well, my wife's always beat me down because I don't get more free stuff for what I don't know what she thinks I do in the industry, which is not much. I mean, I just do what I run a con, half run a con. She's like, how come you don't get free invites to all these other conventions? I'm like, honey, I don't produce anything. I'm not a producer of actual material. I run a con. That's it. I don't, I can't go to a con and I can run a game and stuff, but I'm not a draw. I am not a draw at con. Oh yes, you are. You're so funny and this, and you know all the rules. I'm like, no, that's not, no. You understand what's out there. The people that there's people out there that have they've actually got skins on the wall. I don't have skins on the wall. I run a con. That's it. So she thinks that I have this. I'm far more elevated in the hierarchy of gaming than I am, which is sweet, which is very sweet.
That's what wives are supposed to think.
Everybody knows who I am in North Texas, so she figures,
yeah,
what happened?
Right, but see, you need to capitalize. You need to capitalize on the Bad Mike persona with the the devil costume and the pitchfork.
There,
start making guest appearances at cons and that.
Yeah, Game Hall, come on.
Great minds must think alike. Well, let's put it this way. Just what you suggest, Steve. He said, if you were smart, you'd play off this Satan thing and you would do auctions and you could get free invites to conventions all over the United States if you just wanted to go with that persona. So now that you've said that, Steve, maybe that wasn't a terrible idea on his part. I'm going to have to give it a little examination of the merit of that because what Zach told me, and I don't believe it. But if you're saying it too, I may have to look into that.
It was a good idea when I had it. I think it was kind of half baked when Zach.
Look how much more you did with the idea. You really worked it up, and the ideas make some more sense when you say it. So I mean, definitely. I'm considering it now that you've done so much work with this concept, and it was all half baked, but it came out of Zach's mouth. So
yeah.
So here's a question. John Miller said, "Would Steve care to talk about his time working for Wizards?" Because for those who don't know, Steve he's worked really on every edition, right, of D&D, and which is interesting. I mean, you have a really unique perspective there. What was it like working for Wizards versus TSR?
Very different workplaces, but I guess the constant between them is, in both cases, the team that is actually working on D&D is a fairly small part of the company, and is really dedicated to what it does. Right, it's a small group of people who love D&D. And that was pretty much the same, in both companies. So really great people to work with right there in your immediate team. What's different about it is that both of these companies, that team exists within the much larger concept of a corporation, and they're two very different corporations. TSR was being run by people who were not really business people to a large extent. I mean, some of them were, and some of them weren't. And I don't want to rehash all the ins and outs of the, Lorraine Williams's managing of the company. But suffice it to say that the way Lorraine Williams ran TSR was completely different from the way the people at Wizards, ran Wizards of the Coast. But in both cases, you have a small core of creative people who have to somehow navigate, all the BS that comes with being part of a corporation.
Fair enough.
I don't know if that really answers your question.
Yeah.
I don't want to badmouth anybody here.
No, and you should.
I don't think there's not nobody who caused problems within the creative end of either of those companies was doing so with evil intent, right? It's just everybody has their own priorities. Everybody has their own boss they have to answer to, and the bosses who get answered to at Wizards of the Coast are very different from the bosses who got answered to at TSR. And it's kind of apples and oranges, right? It's a little tough to make clear comparisons.
John Miller wants to know what your favorite or most memorable project was when you worked at TSR and for Wizards.
Interesting question. Favorite project at TSR? Marvel Superheroes was a really big one. Oriental Adventures was a huge personal favorite. Second edition was a really great time at the company, but it was so big, it's kind of hard to nail that down and say that was a favorite project. It was it might have been my favorite process at the company. I really enjoyed, I'm going to toss this one out there. I was the product manager for Al-Qadim, for that whole product line.
Oh, really? I had no clue.
And that was one of the things that kind of plagued us at TSR was that if a product succeeded, then right away the management wanted sequels. They wanted more, right? More of the same. That thing did really well, got good reviews, sold really well. Let's do it again. And Al-Qadim, we very clearly set out at the beginning of that product, of that product line. We said, we are going to create this thing. We're going to run it for 2 years. If it's still selling strong at the end of 2 years, we will extend it for a 3rd year, but that's it. It will not go beyond 3 years, because at the end of 3 years, we don't think we can do it justice anymore. We think we will be out of, all the really great ideas for Al-Qadim will be exhausted at the end of 3 years. And at the end of 2 years, management was like, it's doing great. Let's do that 3rd year. At the end of 3 years, they were like, it's still doing pretty well. Can we do a 4th? And we said, nope. we said it was a 3-year life on this thing, and we are going to close the door. We got a little bit of pushback, but in the end, management actually said, you know what? This is your call. We're going to respect your feeling on this. And we were, I look back at that whole product line, and I think it's just such a fantastic package of products. And I am really glad we did not milk it out anywhere beyond the 3 years.
Damn. All right. So then, what about Wizards? What would your favorite be for your time at Wizards?
So most of the time that I was at Wizards, I was not involved in like creating printed D&D products. I spent a lot of time there working on the website.
Oh, okay.
And then eventually I took over the online versions of like Dungeon and Dragon. But we did a lot of great things with the online magazines and the online content. Excuse me. But I think if you ask me what's my favorite thing that I ever did for Wizards of the Coast, it would be, and I had already left the company and was working as a freelancer, but I would say Tomb of Annihilation. I really, I had a great time working on Tomb of Annihilation, and I think it turned out really well.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say probably that.
Fair enough. Nice. John Milros wants to know what you liked about working on Oriental Adventures.
Because OA was like the first instance where the design team at TSR really got to stretch its legs without Gary Gygax looming over our shoulders. Even though Gary's name is on the cover, his contribution to the book was actually very small. That is Zeb Cook's book, almost from cover to cover, and we were testing all kinds of concepts in that book because we were already thinking about second edition at that time,
right?
And so we were testing all sorts of concepts that we hoped would make the jump into second edition, and seeing how well they worked and how the audience would react to them. Beyond just the fact that
non-weapon fishes,
yeah, and beyond just the fact that it's such a great setting, right? I mean, who doesn't love samurai movies and kung fu movies and all that kind of stuff? So it was just enormous fun to work on. Plus, it was cool. Got to just indulge that love of all those movies and cultural features, and I mean, we really tried to do it justice, right? That kind of, I know that we get a certain amount of flack now, even for the name of the product, which is no longer. If we'd had any clue at the time that anyone would find that offensive, we would have done things a little differently. But it was a very different cultural time, and
right.
We thought we were being
everybody. Yeah, nobody would have used the word gypsies. I mean, look how many products from the late '70s on use the name gypsies in there, and that's absolutely frowned on now. But it was a different time, and so I don't think you can be held responsible for how things are now. But that's a big deal now, because now you have a lot of people that, well, one of the things they don't like about Oriental Adventures is it's because it's basically generic Asian, right? It's not Chinese, it's not Japanese, it's not. I mean, it's generic Asian fantasy, and a lot of people, nowadays are like, well, this shows a basic misunderstanding of the whole culture. But that's what you were trying to do. It was a generic fantasy based in a Asian type culture. It's not meant to be absolutely reflective of any one culture.
Right. It's not historical.
Right. And it's not even really. I'm not sure it was ever really even meant to reflect the culture so much as to capture the spirit of the films. Right. Because there's such a rich body of Japanese samurai films and Chinese martial arts films, and we all loved those. And when you're talking about adventure, that's where you're going, and that's what Americans knew about all of that. So as I say, we weren't trying to necessarily pin down the culture of Japan. We were trying to emulate a certain genre of film that came out of Japan or China.
Well, it's funny because I know that you did a great job with it, because I still can remember having that book at my friend James's table in his kitchen and having us go through it and go, all right, what do you want to be, a Wujen? Oh, you want to be a Wujen ninja? All right, well, and I still have that vision, and I can almost smell the room and feel the table. So that is Unearthed Arcana and Oriental Adventures are these two books that I can remember when they were still pristine in my hands, having them and using them, and the literal magic that occurred at that time. So for something like that to be burned into your memory, I don't know, 35, 40 years later, you guys did a pretty good job.
Yeah. Plus, kudos to Jim Holloway. The illustrations he did for that whole line were just some of the best illustrations that it ever put in AD&D products, as far as I was concerned. Those things were fantastic.
I love Holloway's work, both on D&D and on Paranoia. Oh, God.
Oh, yeah.
So Steve, another aspect that I think you told me this years ago, but you also did work on Pools of Radiance, correct? The original TSR SSI computer game, which was that, honestly, that was the first computer I ever had, was an Apple IIe. That was the first ever computer game I played, and to this day holds a special place in my heart. Now, I've tried to play it in the last few years using programs online, and yikes, I mean, I can't anymore, but it was great. It was a great game for the time. So what was exactly your part in that project? I mean, what did you do in that project?
Well, originally, my number one contribution was drawing there were supposed to be a whole bunch of essentially geomorphic city blocks that the software could mix and match and arrange, however they were needed. And initially, they were supposed to be 32 by 32 squares. And so I drew these very detailed city maps. I don't remember how many, but 32 on a 32 by 32 grid, each one of them. And I mean, that was a huge amount of work. And then when it was all done, a little bit later, SSI came back and said, yeah, it turns out that the computers just don't have the memory capacity to deal with those big maps. We actually need them redrawn much smaller. And I forget what the ultimate size was, but I mean, it was like half the size or less. And it was not an even multiple. It was not like I could just cut everything in half or cut everything by a third, right? The maps all had to be redone from scratch. So all those city geomorphs I had to draw them, twice. And I did a few little adventure segments for it. I think there's a piece of it where there's a dungeon. You go down through a well in part of the city, and there's a dungeon down there. I designed that. I forget what all else. There were bits and pieces that were just constantly being thrown at you. Oh, we need this. Can you get that done? The way computer game companies, the way SSI operated, was very different from the way TSR operated. So that was a bit of a learning curve for everyone, right? Where we're trying to adapt to their processes and get them what they need in a timely fashion, which was usually, 2 days from now.
Oh, well, it was so interesting because, for somebody who played computer games in the 80s, it was so different from other computer games, and it was iconic enough that they used the same game engine over and over and over and over
for
again.
Years.
Yeah, for years.
Yeah.
But it was so cool because it was really the first computer game I can remember, maybe the first ever, which was basically it was a sandbox. You could go, you could hex crawl over here. You didn't have to necessarily do things, or you had to do this thing before that thing. But if you wanted to wait on that thing for a while, you could. You could do this thing and then do this thing a whole bunch. And you could just go out in the wilderness and fight monsters. There was random encounters stuff. There was random dungeons out in the wilderness you could find, which was at the time was just, it was mind blowing because nobody did that. Everything in a computer game back then had a specific purpose for being in that game, and there was a reason you went from here to here to here to here. The Radiant series blew that all out of the water. That was like, nope, we're gonna,
a bit more
you can do this, but you don't have to do it in a certain order, which is really
good.
Yeah, I had a Commodore 64 for that, so that was a blast.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I remember I worked at a job.
I don't think I ever even played the Pool of Radiance computer game because I didn't have a computer that would run it at the time. So.
Oh no, you could not afford Apple IIe. Oh no.
You missed
it was good. I remember working a job at the time. I was working a graveyard shift job, and I would work from midnight till it was a weird job. I worked till midnight till 8 a.m. And I remember getting that game. It'd been out a couple years, and people just told me how great it was. So I remember getting that game, and I would on the weekends I worked. That's what I worked. I worked midnight till 8 a.m. and the week I work a regular job. I remember getting off the job at 8 a.m. and I would start playing Pools of Radiance until I went back to work at midnight. And things didn't work out very good. I was nodding off in the middle of my graveyard shift job, but all I could think about my graveyard shift job was, okay, I think I figured out that one puzzle. I think I need to go here. I mean, it was for the time it was extremely immersive.
It was a lot of fun.
Yep. Well, and those kinds of stories, like almost everybody at TSR in the early 80s could tell the story about how they'd almost flunked out of some class in college because they spent all their time in class drawing dungeons, right?
There you go. Yeah. Or reading fantasy books. I would do that in political science. And I would only pop somebody actually threw me under the table or under the bus. It's like, well, he's reading books all the time in class. He's reading like, and it was great because the instructor was like, yeah, but when he pipes in, he actually makes a point and is apparently paying enough attention to participate. Yeah, but he's reading books. So she's like, I don't care. He's not causing trouble. I was like, okay, good. Gonna go back to
what a little snitch.
Oh God, yeah, I was reading like Stormbringer or whatever. It was like for the elixirs. Like, but I would always have like you pay attention of it. Listen, this is back in 86, 87, and again, it was political science. I think we were talking probably about the Sandinistas and communism, and it was getting to be a very political conversation. And I would make my point, go back to my book, still be. And it was annoying people that I could make points and multitask. And, I didn't take notes in college. I was not a great student. Minimal input, maximum output. The least amount of work I can do for whatever grade I can scrounge. I got out.
If you could have worked an Elric metaphor into your discussion of the same.
Oh, that would have been awesome.
That would have been perfect.
Yeah, wouldn't that have been like, will it cost you your soul to accomplish this? Because if it will, I can arrange it for you. It's just a small price to pay. But oh God, I read a lot of fiction throughout my college classes, just because I didn't find most of my college classes all that interesting. And to suppose your grade was based upon papers or a test, do your reading for the test and find a paper topic that you actually might be somewhat motivated to do. Class participation usually meant nothing in most of my college classes. So I'll show up and be present and not be present. It qualified me for a civil service job in the end. What can I tell you? So,
Well, there you go.
there we go. So, Mike,
Yeah,
I'm going to throw this at you. I'm going to throw this at you for the North Texas news that we got to talk about. Because we're at 1 hour and 45 minutes. We probably should touch on the North Texas news.
So, oh shoot, yeah, you're right. So, for those who don't know, this is our 13th con. Doug, who has stage 4 colon cancer and has had health issues over the years, is going to unfortunately miss the con this year. He had major surgery, having to do some blockages because of his colon cancer, and we're just hoping that everything turns out all right for him. But he will miss the con. Doug's son David are going to run the con. Everything's going to be the same as it was before. We have the same special guests. The con runs itself. I mean, really, and most everybody that goes to the con is very astute and kind of knows how the con's going to go this year. But yes, unfortunately, we have thoughts and prayers of Doug, and hopefully he will recover enough to be able to watch us on
Mike. Oh, you're freezing.
And I need to see about that live. Whoa. Can you hear me now? Can you see me now?
Yeah,
we're getting a really bad connection
thing
here because you and Steve just
Steve.
You guys
Steve
are back.
looks fine to me.
Back now.
I think.
Anyway, so we. Okay. You two look terrible. You two look. Yeah, we have some issues tonight. It sounds like connecting. My conversations have been so weird because everything's a little slow for some reason.
That's how you appear to. Oh, and then we just
lost him.
Well, if Mike comes back, obviously he had a connection problem in his end. Mike is returning, and now he'll be in the bottom spot. Hold on.
Okay, I'm back.
You might not be lagging.
There we go. I'm back. Okay, now everybody's back again. Anyway, I was saying that the con will go on. Everybody will be there a week from tonight. As long as we have a better internet.
A better internet connection than this? Yeah.
Hopefully.
We'll cross our fingers. Because next Wednesday we are going
anything's
to.
Oh boy!
With Chris Stodgill, we're going to be doing a live stream with the alcohol testing, which any of our special guests, of course, are invited to join us.
Oh yes.
Chris Stodgill.
We will be. Yes.
He's going to be hooking us up.
Did he say we're drinking?
No, but it's not going to be as vile as 2 years ago when we were drinking things that like nuclear waste Fruit Loops. We lost Mike again, but we were drinking some really horrid stuff, and we did it for the podcast. But now we're going to do it for the live stream, so it shall be interesting. And we're going to do this Wednesday night. Steve, you are more than welcome to join us. Let's see. Mike's coming back. Let's see if Mike.
I don't know. I'm sorry, guys.
Don't blame us. Don't blame us.
No, it's not. It's not you. I'm going to blame. I will blame you, Eric. I'm just going to blame you for fun.
Okay.
Well, I can actually hear you without a delay. You guys have been on a delay all night. It's been really weird. I probably should reboot next time that happens. That probably would have solved the problem. Anyway, so Christopher has booze, but it's not booze that's going to make us gag. Is what you're saying?
Apparently not as bad as last time. So.
Okay, good.
Okay. That satisfy you, Mike?
Yes, because there was some really, really bad stuff that I drank 2 years ago. It was foul.
It was hard.
Foul.
And
terribly foul. So yes.
visuals would have been great. So this time we will have visuals, but they probably won't be as disgusting, which is probably beneficial in the long run.
No, I'd rather drink good booze. I'm getting too old to drink bad booze. Come on.
Oh, you and me both, sir. You and me both. Steve, I can't thank you enough for joining us, by the way. Mike and I have had a bunch of really solid, great guests, but I've bumped into you numerous times at the Frog Guy table. I never really got a chance to talk with you, and it has been special. Really, it's been great.
Thanks. I had a great time.
Thank you so much. Yeah.
So
we didn't get a chance to talk about your love of Gamma World, because you usually always run Gamma World or Boot Hill. We didn't even talk about your Boot Hill and Gamma World cred, because you're always running a Boot Hill and Gamma World game in North Texas. We talk about that.
I didn't run Boot Hill the first few years I was there, and then at some point, I forget which year it was, Doug said, "Hey, how come you're coming to Texas? How come you're not running Boot Hill?" So I said, "Well, I guess I never really gave it a thought. I thought you wanted me here to run D&D. So if you want Boot Hill, I'll run some Boot Hill." I was actually working on my Boot Hill scenario for this year, right before connecting into this
nice
show. So
nice,
and that I'll probably go back and do some more work on it after the show is done.
See, Gamma World.
I am always, as always, I am way behind on my con prep. I'll probably finish my prep on the plane ride down.
Prep? What's con prep? Gamma World was the first non-D&D product I ever bought.
Oh, boy.
And I still remember getting that great covered box and opening it up and going, "This is great, but wait, so if I got 15 Constitution, I have 15 hit dice?"
Yeah, but what am I? Holy cow! Look at all these hit points. I'm unkillable.
Yes, I was like, this is awesome. Yeah, no, hit points were just kind of like, you really don't need them, because so much stuff can kill you outright. It's kind of like just fluff.
Yeah. So but, my favorite Gamma World story. I'll be brief. It was playing with Jim Ward in the basement of the old Dungeon Hobby Shop. Jim was running. And it was just me and a guy named Neil Christensen, who worked at TSR at that time, as the players. And we found an artifact, had to try to figure out what it was. And I said, "All right, I'm going to take it over behind that rock and fiddle around with it." Because things always blew up in Jim's games. And I'm fiddling around with it, and I got a bad result on the table. And Jim says, "A beam of radiation shoots out of it and melts your face off." And I said, "Wait a minute, Jim, my character is immune to radiation." And Jim gets this sad look on his face. And then he turns to Neil and he says, "A beam of radiation shoots out of it and melts your face off."
Somebody's face has to go.
I'm a half mile away. And now he's mad at me because I'm not immune to radiation. But that thing was going to melt somebody's face off.
Oh. Yep, we lost Mike for the third time. I've lost track of this. Obviously, Mike's connection has been a bit flaky today, but listen, I cannot thank you enough. This has been spot on awesome. We've had some great guests from this year's North Texas RPG Con. The last couple of weeks on Wednesdays, but we've definitely ended it on a really high note. So if Peter and Zach invite you, just turn them down, because you'll never be able to match this.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to the convention, and I hope to bump into you there. And
let's bring back Mike for yet again. Hold on a second. Is this Mike? Mike, is this you? Hello? Is this really you, or is this like my imagination? I don't
I'm just
know.
going to call pretty good. I don't know what. I'm having issues. I don't know what's wrong. I'm usually fine, but yeah, maybe I might need to reboot the server. I don't know. See, we just need Doug back. Doug could figure out what the hell is going wrong here.
Yeah, I think you've been hacked, and what we're
get
actually
better,
seeing.
fix the server.
What we're actually seeing is a deep fake of Bad
Yes.
Mike, and it's
It's
not
the real bad. It's not the real Bad Mike. Is this what it really
Damn
feels like?
But it's not. Disagree.
Yeah. Yep. All right,
I'm
Mike.
sorry, guys. I was in and out all evening. That stinks.
Well, but you've certainly been in and out at the end, and that could almost be considered a sexual comment.
It's a charade.
Go there. Folks, again, huge thanks to Steve. I'm going to do my normal spiel in this wonderful world that we live in. None of us are medical professionals, so I'm not going to give you advice in the world of COVID except use your common sense to keep yourself, your family, your friends, your loved ones healthy and safe. If you're not healthy, you can't help anybody else. So just common sense. Be safe, be well, God bless. Roll those dice. Hopefully next week we'll have a better connection for Mike.
Mm-hmm.
But he's on time delay, so it's the Mike from the past and the future. Maybe we'll have that next week. All right, folks. On that note, I am going to bid you all good night. So, laters.